Hello everyone. A lot of people think the hardest part of getting old is the pain in the knees, the doctor visits, or watching your hair turn white. But in my experience, that is not the hardest part at all. The hardest part is sitting in a quiet house at the end of the day and realizing nobody is coming through the front door. Nobody needs you to cook dinner anymore. Nobody calls your name from the other room. And after a while, the silence starts talking to you. I know because I lived that way myself for many years after retirement. There was a time when I truly believed life had already given me all the meaningful moments I was ever going to get. I thought happiness belonged to younger people, busy families, crowded homes, and loud dinner tables. But I was wrong. And today, at 84 years old, I can tell you something with complete honesty. Some of the most peaceful years of my life began after I learned how to live alone properly, not survive alone, live alone. There is a difference. And now I want to share these things that changed my life because I know there are people listening right now, sitting in dim kitchens, small apartments, quiet bedrooms, wondering if life still has warmth left in it for them. It does. It absolutely does. The first thing that changed me was something very small, almost embarrassingly small. I started creating tiny rituals for myself every single day. Now, when you are younger, routines usually belong to other people. You wake up because of work. You cook because the children are hungry. You clean because life demands it. But when you grow older and the house becomes quiet, the days lose shape. One Tuesday looks exactly like Thursday. Sometimes you wake up and cannot even remember what day it is. That happened to me more times than I like to admit. I remember one winter afternoon standing in my kitchen staring at the clock for nearly 10 minutes because I had nowhere to be, nobody expecting me, nothing urgent waiting for me. And strangely enough, that freedom did not feel peaceful. It felt empty. Human beings need rhythm. Even old hearts need rhythm. So I started building tiny moments into my day that belonged only to me. Every morning I began waking up before sunrise, not because I had to, but because I wanted to see the sky slowly brighten through my living room window. I would put on the same old gray sweater, boil water for coffee, and sit quietly in the same chair while the neighborhood slowly woke up around me. No television, no radio, just the sound of birds and the old heater rattling beside me. At night, I started lighting a small lamp beside my recliner instead of leaving the entire house dark. I would read a few pages from an old book before bed, even if I was tired. Those little habits sound simple, maybe even foolish to younger people, but let me tell you something. Those rituals saved me. They reminded me that my life still had structure, still had dignity, still had moments worth showing up for. There is something deeply healing about knowing tomorrow morning your tea will still be warm, your chair will still be waiting for you, and the sunrise will still arrive faithfully outside your window. Small rituals teach the nervous system that life is safe again. And once I understood that, my lonely little house slowly stopped feeling like a prison and started feeling like home. The second thing that changed my life came after I realized how cruel I had become to myself. Now this is something many older people never talk about openly. We speak kindly to strangers. We comfort our children. We encourage our grandchildren. But inside our own minds, many of us are merciless. I used to sit alone at night thinking terrible things about myself. I would think maybe people stopped calling because I had become boring. Maybe I was no longer useful. Maybe my best years were already buried somewhere behind me. And when those thoughts repeat long enough, they start sounding like facts. One evening I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror and I realized I looked exhausted. Not from physical work, but from carrying my own criticism all day long. That was the moment I decided I needed to change the way I spoke to myself. I began very slowly. Every night before sleeping, I forced myself to write down one thing that was still good in my life. Some nights it was nothing more than, "The soup tasted good today," or, "My back hurt a little less." Other nights I wrote about hearing rain against the roof, or receiving a short phone call from my daughter. At first it felt pointless, but after a few weeks, something started happening inside my mind. I began noticing good moments while they were happening instead of only noticing what was missing. I started appreciating sunlight coming through the curtains. I started enjoying the smell of clean laundry again. I even found myself laughing quietly at old memories while washing dishes. Gratitude is not magic. It does not erase grief or loneliness, but it changes what your mind searches for every day. And I also learned to stop attacking myself with words I would never say to another human being. Whenever I caught myself thinking, "You are useless now," I would answer back out loud like an old friend sitting beside me. I would say, "You worked hard your whole life. You loved your family the best you could. You are still here. That matters." Some people may think talking to yourself sounds silly. Well, loneliness teaches you something important. Your own voice becomes the loudest voice in your life, so it better become a gentle one. The older I got, the more I realized peace is impossible when your own mind treats you like an enemy. Kindness toward yourself is not weakness. At our age, it is survival. Now, the third thing that changed everything for me was learning how to feed my mind again. Retirement can make a person mentally sleepy without them even realizing it. When you stop working, stop solving problems, stop learning new things, the days begin blending together. I noticed it happening to me around my late 70s. I was spending too many hours staring at the television, half listening, half thinking, completely disconnected from the world. My memory felt slower. My spirit felt dull. Then one afternoon I found an old history book buried in the closet, one I had not touched in nearly 40 years. I sat down planning to read only a few pages, and before I knew it, 2 hours had passed. For the first time in months, my mind felt awake. That moment reminded me that curiosity does not die simply because the body grows old. In fact, I believe curiosity becomes even more important as we age because it keeps the soul moving forward. So I started giving my brain small things to explore every day. Sometimes I watched documentaries about places I would never visit. Sometimes I read about astronomy even though I barely understood half of it. Sometimes I listened to old interviews with writers, musicians, or ordinary people telling stories about their lives. And what surprised me most was how alive it made me feel. Learning gives the day texture. It gives you something to think about besides your aches, your regrets, or the silence in the hallway. I knew an old man years ago named Walter who spent the final decade of his life learning about birds. Never cared about birds before retirement. Then suddenly, he was sitting on park benches with binoculars, writing down the names of species in tiny notebooks like a schoolboy discovering the world for the first time. He once told me, "As long as I'm still curious, I don't feel old." I never forgot that sentence, and he was right. The mind needs something gentle to reach toward. Otherwise, loneliness starts filling all the empty space. So even now, at 84 years old, I try to learn something every week. Not because I need qualifications or accomplishments anymore, but because staying interested in life keeps the heart from quietly closing itself off. And as I learned that lesson, another realization slowly began changing me in ways I never expected. And that realization led me naturally into the fourth thing that transformed my later years, and I truly believe this may be the hardest one for most people to accept. I had to stop running away from silence. Now that sounds simple when you say it quickly, but for many older people, silence feels terrifying. When the television is off, when the dishes are done, when the phone does not ring, there is nowhere left to hide from your own thoughts. I spent years filling every quiet moment with noise. I would leave the radio playing in empty rooms. I would fall asleep with the television on just to avoid hearing the stillness of the house. I told myself I was keeping busy, but the truth was I was afraid. Afraid of memories, afraid of regret, afraid that if I sat quietly long enough, I would feel how alone I really was. One rainy evening changed that for me. I remember the weather clearly because the rain tapped softly against the windows for hours. The power went out in my neighborhood just after dinner, and suddenly the house became completely silent except for the storm outside. No lights, no television, no distractions. I sat there in the dark for a long time expecting to feel miserable, but something unexpected happened. My breathing slowed down, my shoulders relaxed. I could hear the rain, the clock ticking in the hallway, even my own heartbeat. And for the first time in years, I was not fighting the quiet. I was simply sitting inside it. There is a difference between loneliness and solitude, though many people confuse the two. Loneliness feels like abandonment. Solitude feels like rest. Loneliness says nobody wants me. Solitude says I finally have room to hear myself think. That night I realized the silence in my home was not my enemy. It was only empty space waiting to be filled with peace instead of fear. After that, I started practicing sitting quietly every day for a few minutes with no noise around me. No phone in my hand, no television in the background, just me breathing slowly in my chair. At first, my thoughts raced all over the place. I remembered arguments from 30 years earlier. I worried about my health. I replayed mistakes I could no longer fix. But gradually, like muddy water settling in a glass, my mind became calmer. I began noticing things I had ignored for years. The comfort of my favorite blanket, the sound of wind moving through the trees outside, the simple relief of not rushing anywhere anymore. We spend most of our younger years overwhelmed by responsibilities, deadlines, and noise. Sometimes old age is the first time life finally becomes quiet enough for us to meet ourselves honestly. And when I stopped resisting that quiet, I discovered something surprising. I actually liked my own company. I liked sitting on the porch alone at sunset. I liked drinking coffee slowly without conversation. I liked having peaceful mornings that belonged entirely to me. That was the moment I stopped feeling abandoned by life and started feeling accompanied by it instead. The fifth thing that changed me may sound ordinary, but I believe it is one of the greatest medicines for sadness and old age. I started moving my body gently every single day and spending more time outside with nature. Now listen, I am not talking about lifting weights or running marathons. At my age, getting out of a low chair already feels like an Olympic event some mornings. I am talking about simple movement, walking to the mailbox, standing in the sun for 10 minutes, watering plants, stretching your legs while the morning air is still cool. There was a period after retirement when I barely left the house. Days passed with the curtains closed. My body stiffened. My sleep became poor. Even my thoughts felt heavier. One morning I stepped outside almost by accident just to bring in the trash bin, and I remember the sunlight hitting my face after days indoors. It felt like waking up from a long sleep. So I started sitting outside every morning, even if only for a few minutes. I watched birds hopping across the yard. I listened to distant lawn mowers and children playing somewhere down the block. Slowly, I began walking a little farther each week. First to the corner, then around the block, then to a nearby park bench where I could sit and rest halfway through. Those walks healed something inside me that I cannot fully explain. Nature has a quiet way of reminding old people that life keeps moving gently forward. Trees lose leaves and bloom again. Rain comes and passes. Morning always returns. When you spend too much time alone indoors, the mind starts shrinking inward around fear and memory. But outside, under open sky, the world feels larger again. I knew a widow named Margaret who planted tomatoes in cracked buckets behind her apartment building because she said watching something grow gave her a reason to wake up every morning. Another old fellow I met at the park started feeding squirrels after his wife died. Tiny things. Simple things, but those little connections to the living world matter deeply. Human beings were never meant to spend all day staring at walls. Even now, if I feel sadness creeping into me, I step outside before I do anything else. Fresh air does not solve every problem, but it loosens the grip sadness can have on the body. Sometimes healing begins with nothing more complicated than sunlight on your hands and a short walk beneath the trees. And finally, the sixth thing that gave my life meaning again was understanding that purpose does not disappear simply because crowds disappear. Many older people think purpose has to be grand. They think if they are no longer raising children, running businesses, or leading busy social lives, then their usefulness is over. I believed that myself for a long time. After retirement, I kept wondering, who needs me now? That question haunted me, but eventually I learned something important. Purpose in old age becomes quieter, softer, more personal. It is less about achievement and more about contribution. I started very small. Once a week I called an older neighbor who lived alone just to check on him. Sometimes our conversations lasted only 5 minutes, but afterward I felt lighter. I began writing letters to old friends instead of waiting for someone to contact me first. I donated books to the local library. One Christmas, I spent an afternoon helping children choose free books during a small charity event downtown. And I cannot describe the feeling of watching those little faces light up over stories. It reminded me that even old hands still have something to give this world. Purpose does not need applause. It only needs sincerity. Sometimes purpose is simply encouraging another lonely person because you understand their pain. Sometimes it is cooking a meal for someone sick. Sometimes it is sharing your wisdom with younger generations so they make fewer mistakes than you did. The beautiful thing about purpose is that it pulls your attention away from what you have lost and gently places it onto what you can still offer. And when you realize your existence still matters to somebody, even in a small way, life becomes warmer again. So today, at 84 years old, my house is still quiet. I still eat many dinners alone. Some evenings are harder than others. I still miss people I loved very deeply. Age does not erase grief, but I no longer see my life as empty. I have my rituals. I have learned to speak kindly to myself. I keep my mind curious. I sit peacefully with silence now instead of fearing it. I move gently through the world and spend time under the sky whenever I can. And most importantly, I wake up knowing there is still goodness I can offer before my time here is done. That is enough for me. More than enough. If you are listening from a quiet little room somewhere in the world, I want you to know this. Your life is not over because it became quieter. Sometimes quiet is where life finally becomes honest. Sometimes the later years become beautiful only after the noise fades away. Start small. One small habit. One gentle walk. One kind word toward yourself. One peaceful moment without fear. That is how healing begins. Thank you for spending this time with me, my dear friends. Truly, sit down again with me next time, and we will keep each other company a little longer. Until then, take good care of your heart, move gently through your days, and remember that even now, life still has tenderness left to give you. Goodbye, and I will see you again very soon.